Can a life be erased by a single piece of paper? Sarah Bell, a widow with hands calloused from decades of tending a home that was never legally her own, sat in her parlor. The room was a sanctuary of memory, each piece of lace and every polished piece of furniture a testament to a life spent in dutiful service as a wife in a patriarchal family structure. She had believed her future was as solid as the oak floors beneath her feet, a peaceful progression into a quiet, respected old age under the roof of her son, Silas, the legal inheritor of the land. The gentle hum of afternoon normalcy was abruptly shattered by the arrival of Silas and his pregnant wife, Eliza. The silence they brought was heavier than any spoken word, and Eliza's hand resting possessively on her swollen belly was a stark, unyielding statement. The news, when it came, was not a request, but a decree. Eliza, with cold, calculated precision, explained that with a baby coming, there simply wasn't enough room. The house, the land, the life that Sarah Bell had nurtured for so long, were now needed for a new, burgeoning family, a family that, by law and social convention, held all the rights. Sarah Bell's husband had been gone for 10 years, and in the intervening time, she had, in every sense, become a quiet fixture of the household, a living memory. Her separate legal existence had vanished upon her marriage, leaving her without the legal ability to own property, enter into contracts, or challenge her son's authority. The weight of this legal invisibility, once a distant notion, now fell upon her with crushing finality. Silas, a man who had been raised to be a patriarch of his own family, stood silent and compliant, a testament to the iron will of his wife. Eliza's face, etched with a triumphant certainty, made it clear that this was not a matter for debate. She had the law and the social order of the time on her side, and she would not back down. As Sarah Bell's mind reeled, she saw a flicker of triumph in her daughter-in-law's eyes, a cold fire that seemed to consume the warmth of the room. A single powerful question hung in the air. What can a woman do when the very system she has served her entire life turns against her, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back? The following morning, a lawyer with a stern face and an even sterner demeanor stood in the parlor, the same room that had witnessed Sarah Bell's emotional collapse. He read from a sheaf of documents, his voice a dry, legalistic drone that made her past feel like a distant, irrelevant dream. "The law is clear, Mrs. Bell. This property belongs to your son." But as he spoke, a quiet defiance ignited in Sarah Bell's eyes. She had spent a sleepless night rereading the will her husband had left behind, a document she had long thought to be a simple last testament. But buried within its archaic language was a legal anomaly, a rare provision from an early Married Women's Property Act that had been quietly passed a decade before. It did not grant her ownership, but it did grant her a legal right of first refusal on any sale of the property. Her son and his wife had assumed she was too meek, too uneducated to understand the nuance. They were wrong. Eliza's face went white with fury when Sarah Bell, with a calm that belied the storm raging inside her, interrupted the lawyer. "I believe," she said, her voice steady, "that I have the right to purchase the property myself. Is that not so?" The lawyer, for the first time, looked genuinely surprised. He stammered, and Silas and Eliza exploded in a furious protest. They had planned to sell the house to a family friend at a reduced price, using the money to secure a land claim out west. Sarah Bell, however, saw the loophole not as a bid to stay, but as an escape. She announced her intention to sell the house, not to a family friend, but to a developer in the city who had offered a substantial sum. This was her act of rebellion. She wasn't just leaving, she was taking back her future and the financial asset her family had so callously taken from her. The transaction was swift and brutal. Sarah Bell watched as the money was transferred to her name. It was not a victory for her, but a profound and painful separation. She walked out of the house with a single satchel, now a woman with no home but with a newfound purpose. As she rode out of town on a horse she had purchased with the new money, she did not look back. But from an upstairs window, her daughter-in-law, Eliza, watched her go, a small, dark shadow against the morning light. A single potent thought burned in her mind. This was not over. Sarah Bell, once a paragon of domesticity, now found herself a greenhorn from the East, a new and dangerous role. Her soft hands, accustomed to the delicate art of needlepoint, trembled as she held the reins of a sturdy horse she had purchased with a handful of her new fortune. The confining corsets and heavy skirts of her past were discarded for practical, sturdy frontier attire. The transition was both liberating and terrifying. She was a woman without a home, yet the vast, empty sky above her seemed to offer a promise of a new life, a new identity she had yet to discover. The physical discomfort of the journey, the ache in her back, and the sun beating down on her head was a welcome distraction from the emotional pain of her betrayal. She was no longer just running from her family. She was running toward an unknown destiny. The world around her was a contradiction, a land of stark, brutal beauty. She saw nothing but a series of endless, winding roads, each one leading her farther away from the life she had known. Her destination was as unmapped as her future. She was a fugitive, in a sense, from a life she no longer wanted, and the money in her satchel felt both like a lifeline and a burden. She rode on, her resolve hardening with every mile. She was no longer the docile, submissive wife the law had made her out to be. She was an active agent in her own life, a person making her own choices. As dusk settled over the landscape, she made camp near a small creek. The fire, a small, flickering beacon in the encroaching darkness, was her only companion. As she stared into the flames, a sense of profound loneliness washed over her. She was now truly on her own. As she lay down to rest, a shadowy figure on a distant ridge watched her. It was a bounty hunter, hired by her son and daughter-in-law, a cold, amoral man with no allegiance but to money. In his hand, he held a crudely drawn wanted poster with her name on it. The manhunt had officially begun. The Old West was an unforgiving teacher. Sarah Bell, a woman used to the comforts of home, quickly learned the harsh lessons of the trail. Her hands, once blistered by the rains, were now cut and scraped from scrambling over sharp rocks. The endless, flat plains stretched out before her, a vast, empty canvas that swallowed her sense of direction. She ran low on water, her thirst a constant burning agony in her throat. Her fear and exhaustion mounted, a heavy weight that threatened to pull her under. The money in her satchel, the symbol of her newfound freedom, felt worthless against the brutal reality of the open land. She had escaped one prison, only to find herself in another, a landscape with no walls, but with a horizon that seemed to stretch on forever. The viewer is meant to feel her profound physical struggle, her loneliness, and her helplessness. Just as she felt she could go no farther, she saw a small flicker of light in the distance, a fire that seemed to burn with a quiet, ancient warmth. Approaching cautiously, she found an old Native American man, an elder, sitting alone. His eyes, wise and knowing, held no fear or surprise, only a patient acceptance. He wordlessly offered her a water skin and a piece of dried meat. She drank deeply, the cool water a blessed relief, and ate, the simple food a feast after her long, hungry days. In his presence, she felt no danger, only a deep sense of calm, as if she had been brought to him by a force larger than herself. He was a figure of wisdom and spiritual authority, a living library of knowledge and traditions. He did not ask her where she was going, and he did not ask her to thank him. He simply sat, radiating a stillness that was deeply unsettling and profoundly comforting. Sarah Bell, a woman raised to believe in efficiency and direct answers, was perplexed by his quiet nature. As she rose to leave, he pointed with a single knowing finger to a distant mountain peak, its silhouette jagged against the night sky. She asked what he meant, but he only shook his head and returned to the fire. What did the mountain mean? What was he trying to tell her? She had a new, perplexing symbol to carry with her on her journey. Sarah Bell, guided by the elder's silent gesture, traveled toward the distant mountain, her journey now infused with a sense of purpose. She had no idea where she was going or what she would find, but she was following the guidance of a man who had shown her kindness when she had expected none. After days of travel, she crested a ridge and found a small, semi-sedentary Native American village nestled in a hidden valley by a winding river. The sight of the village, with its teepees and the sound of children's laughter, was a profound shock to her senses, a testament to a way of life she had only ever heard of in stories. She was met with suspicion by the villagers, but the elder, who had seemingly arrived before her, spoke on her behalf. Her acceptance was a quiet affair, a mixture of stoic acceptance and quiet curiosity. She was given a place to rest and observed a community founded on principles she could barely comprehend. There was no ownership of land, no legal documents, only a shared existence based on mutual respect and shared resources. The women prepared hides together, the men tended to the horses, and the children played freely in the open air. It was a far cry from the rigid, self-centered life she had left behind. She felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling of belonging she had not felt in her son's home. The elder told her that this feeling was a part of their culture's tiospay, the Lakota notion of a group of people related by blood, marriage, or adoption. Sarah Bell, cast out by her blood family, was beginning to find a new one. But even in this peaceful sanctuary, the past was never far behind. As she sat by the fire, a young woman who had been out gathering berries approached her with a quiet, serious face. "He is coming," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The one who follows your scent, the dark shadow." The bounty hunter's presence was known. The bounty hunter was near. Sarah Bell felt a fresh wave of terror wash over her. Had she brought her troubles to these peaceful people? Would they cast her out just as her family had? The peace was shattered 2 days later when the bounty hunter, a man as cold and unforgiving as the desert itself, rode into the valley. His presence was a violation, an aggressive stain on the communal harmony of the village. He did not ask to enter, but simply rode in, a coiled serpent in the midst of a peaceful clearing. He was a corrupt lawman type, a man who saw no law but his own. He told the villagers that Sarah Bell was a thief who had stolen money that was rightfully her family's. He had no respect for their culture, their land, or their traditions. He saw them as obstacles, as a means to an end. The villagers, though wary of the conflict he brought, were not swayed by his accusations. They had already seen the goodness in the woman he called a thief. The elder, however, stood his ground. He approached the bounty hunter with a quiet dignity that was more powerful than any weapon. He spoke in his native tongue, a lyrical, unhurried stream of words that was a direct and powerful challenge to the man's violent greed. He told the man that Sarah Bell was under their protection, that she was now a member of their tiospy, their extended family, and that her problems were their problems. The bounty hunter, outmatched by the sheer force of their collective unity, appeared to back down. He spat on the ground in an act of profound disrespect, and as he turned his horse to leave, subtly kicked over a small pot of corn. The act was small, but its message was terrifyingly clear. He was not just after the money. He was after their livelihood, their sacred land, their very existence. The villagers watched in stunned silence, their peace shattered by this casual act of malice. The bounty hunter rode away, his parting words echoing in the valley. "I'll be back for what's mine." The overturned corn was a silent, ominous warning, leaving the audience to wonder what else he would do to harm them, and if the threat to their existence was far greater than Sarah Bell's money. The villagers were unsettled, but the elder's wisdom prevailed. He used the bounty hunter's malicious act as a teaching moment, explaining to Sarah Bell and the community that the bounty hunter represented a different way of life, one based on ownership and domination, not on coexistence and respect. "His spirit is sick," the elder said. "It only sees what can be taken." To reinforce Sarah Bell's place within the community, he gave her a task: to help the women prepare a feast for the coming celebration. Sarah Bell, a woman who had once managed a large household with ease, was now learning to do the simplest of tasks with reverence and care. Her active contribution was a powerful statement of her commitment to her new family. The emotional journey was one of acceptance and belonging. She was no longer an outsider, but a working member of a community that valued her not for what she had, but for who she was. The act of grinding maize with the other women, her hands now calloused from the rains, was a physical manifestation of her emotional growth. She was finding her strength, her purpose, and her true identity not in her past life as a wife, but in her new life as a member of a community. The warmth of the Tio Spaye began to heal the wounds of her past. That night, around a crackling campfire, a young boy told a traditional ghost story about a cannibal giant, a Wendigo that stalked the winter woods. The adults laughed, but Sarah Bell shivered, feeling a deep sense of foreboding. The story, a part of their cultural folklore, felt terribly real. The coming winter was a real threat, but the monster was an all-too-real presence in the form of the bounty hunter. Was he a physical monster, or was he a symbol of the destructive, possessive world she had just left? The elder, seeing the disquiet in Sarah Bell's eyes, approached her the next morning. He explained that to truly defeat her pursuer, she must first understand herself. He guided her to a high mountain peak he had pointed to earlier, a place of spiritual significance where the spirits of the land were believed to dwell. He told her to fast and to meditate, seeking a vision that would give her the guidance she needed. From a distance, the bounty hunter watched, a small, dark shadow against the massive spiritual landscape. His presence, unseen by Sarah Bell, made her journey even more perilous, transforming a spiritual quest into a literal one. The emotional arc was one of intense introspection. Sarah Bell confronted her fears, her guilt over leaving her son, and her feelings of powerlessness. She was a woman who had never been alone, never had to rely on her own inner resources. She sat for hours, the wind whipping around her, the sun beating down on her, her past and present colliding in her mind. Her journey was now not just a physical one, but a deep, emotional excavation of her own soul. The viewer feels her vulnerability and her courage, her deep fear and her growing resolve. As she meditated, she had a vivid vision. She saw a vast herd of buffalo being slaughtered by men with rifles, their bodies piled high, a monument to a senseless slaughter. Then, in a horrific twist, the image shifted. She saw her son and daughter-in-law standing over the carcass of a single buffalo, pulling out a handful of money from its stomach. The vision was a jarring, terrifying epiphany. The bounty hunter was not just after her, but after the whole community. She woke with a start, the air cold on her skin, a new and terrifying truth revealed. Sarah Bell returned to the village, her mind reeling. She told the elder about her vision, describing the slaughtered buffalo and the money pulled from its stomach. She connected the dots, her Western-trained mind now seeing with the clarity of spiritual insight. Her son and daughter-in-law had not just sought a financial asset. They had sold their home to secure a land claim out west. That land claim was the valley where the village stood, the sacred grounds of her new Tayospai. The money was not the goal, it was the means to an end, a weapon to legally steal the land that was held sacred by a community with no concept of individual ownership. The bounty hunter's true mission was to seize the land, and Sarah Bell was merely a way to get the money to grease the legal wheels of a corrupt system. The emotional arc was one of dawning realization and renewed resolve. Her personal struggle was now part of a much larger fight, a historical conflict between two opposing worldviews. The settlers' desire for ownership and the natives' reverence for the land. The elder confirmed her fears, telling her that the land had been under threat for years, and that the buffalo herds had been decimated by white hunters who saw them as nothing but a resource to be exploited. This was the bounty hunter's true purpose, to bring the white man's law and greed to a place where it had no hold. Her personal betrayal was now a matter of life and death for an entire community. The bounty hunter returned later that day, not alone this time, but with two other men, as cold and amoral as he was. He rode into the village, his eyes fixed on the land, not on the people. "You can't stay here," he said with a sneer. "This land is all mine." He gestured toward a legal document tucked in his satchel, confirming Sarah Bell's worst fears. The stakes had been raised from personal to communal. The bounty hunter's presence, along with the men he had brought with him, presented an impossible situation. The village, which was a hub for trading and agriculture, was accustomed to peace, not warfare. They had a choice: to flee and give up their ancestral land, or to fight against a superior force with more advanced weapons. Sarah Bell, no longer the helpless widow she once was, took a proactive role. She used her knowledge of Western technology and the remaining money in her satchel to formulate a plan. She bought a box of rifles from a passing trader and taught the young warriors how to shoot, a strange juxtaposition of cultures that only she could have bridged. She showed them how to set traps and create a fortified defensive position on a sacred mountain peak she had seen during her vision quest. The emotional arc was one of courage and leadership. She had transformed from a victim into a strategist, a woman fighting not for herself, but for her new family. The villagers, seeing her determination and the elders' trust in her, were swayed. They decided to stand and fight. The bond between her and the community deepened as she taught them about her world, and they taught her about theirs. The fight was no longer a matter of law, but a battle for survival. The viewer feels a surge of pride in her transformation and the urgency of their situation. The chapter ends with Sarah Bell pulling out her map and marking the location of the best defensive point. Her finger rests on a specific strategic rock formation, a landmark on their sacred mountain. "We make our stand here," she says, her voice echoing with a fierce determination. The audience is left with a single question. Will her knowledge of Western strategy and the tribe's reverence for their land be enough to save them from a force that values money over life? The bounty hunter and his men launched their first assault on the defensive position at dawn. The skirmish was tense and brutal, a clash of two very different worldviews. The bounty hunter and his men fought with a cold, professional ruthlessness. But Sarah Bell and the tribesmen, using their knowledge of the land, repelled them. The warriors, swift and silent, used the mountain's crevices and caves to their advantage, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. Sarah Bell, now a sharpshooting hero in her own right, used her rifle with a newfound accuracy, her hands steady, her aim true. A young warrior was injured, a brutal gash on his arm. Sarah Bell, using the medical supplies she had bought with her money, tended to him, her actions a quiet testament to her courage and her commitment to her new family. The emotional arc was one of raw fear and growing confidence. She was a soldier now, a protector. She moved from a state of terror to a fierce determination, her love for her new family fueling her courage. The viewer's heart pounds with her, feeling the intense peril and the growing bond between her and the community. The blood on her hands, once a symbol of her domestic duties, was now a sign of her new purpose: to defend her home and her people. The bounty hunter and his men retreated, but not before the bounty hunter, in a final act of malice, set fire to the dry prairie grass far below them. The wind began to shift, and the fire, a growing wall of orange and red, raced toward them. The chapter ends with the sight of the approaching blaze, a new and far more terrifying weapon. They had survived the men, but would they survive the fire? The fire raced toward them, a living, roaring beast that consumed everything in its path. It cut off their escape route, trapping them on the sacred mountain. Sarah Bell and the tribesmen watched in horror as their safe haven became a fiery cage. The bounty hunter and his men, now back on the open plains, surrounded the base of the mountain from all sides, a ring of steel and greed. They had the tactical advantage, using the fire to their benefit. Sarah Bell realized they were trapped, out of options and running out of time. The bounty hunter's triumph seemed imminent, as he held all the tactical advantages. The emotional arc was a return to a state of hopelessness. She felt the despair of failure, the guilt of having led these kind people into a deadly trap. The walls were closing in, the smoke filling her lungs. The viewer feels a moment of despair as all hope seems lost. The hero isolated and her allies seemingly useless. The fire was not just an element of nature, but a tool of the bounty hunter's malevolence. It was a visual representation of the greed and destruction that had consumed her old world. The bounty hunter, seeing their predicament, shouted up to them, his voice amplified by the wind and the roar of the fire. "Give me the money and you can all go free. This land is worthless to me without the cash to secure it." The chapter ends with his ultimatum. The audience is left with a horrifying question. Will Sarah Bell give up the last symbol of her old life to save the new one she has found? Sarah Bell, trapped and with no options, remembered her vision quest. She remembered the shaman's ability to manipulate forces and create illusions with great medicine. She formulated a desperate plan. With her remaining money, she bought a handful of mirrors and used the dwindling daylight to reflect the sun's rays off the rocks and trees. She instructed the tribesmen to use their own knowledge of the land to create a smokescreen with wet leaves and grass. Together they created a powerful spiritual illusion, a shimmering wall of light and smoke that seemed to rise from the mountain itself, a false sign of an impending spiritual attack. The emotional arc was a surge of desperate hope. She was no longer just a strategist, but a bridge between two worlds, using her Western mind and the native spiritual understanding to turn the tide. The viewer feels a flicker of optimism, watching her plan unfold, a creative subversion of the antagonist's expectations. The bounty hunter and his men, bewildered by the spectacle, fell for the deception, momentarily losing their focus. Their greed and their belief in a purely physical world made them vulnerable to a spiritual one. The chapter ends as Sarah Bell and the tribesmen, now working in perfect synergy, launch a surprise counterattack. They descend from the mountain, their bodies moving as one, using the shadows and the smoke to their advantage. The bounty hunter, enraged at being fooled, lets out a roar of frustration. The audience is left to wonder how they will leverage this moment of chaos, and whether this last desperate gambit will be enough to turn the tide of the war for their sacred land. The counterattack was a whirlwind of motion, a brutal physical expression of the spiritual and cultural war that had been raging since the moment Sarah Bell first left her home. The bounty hunter, enraged at being fooled, single-mindedly pursued Sarah Bell, his pursuit now a personal vendetta. The fight culminated at the edge of a sheer cliff on the sacred mountain, a final dramatic face-off between two opposing worldviews. On one side stood the bounty hunter, a product of a system that valued ownership and force above all else. On the other stood Sarah Bell, a woman who had learned the power of community and spirituality. The emotional arc reached its climax, pure, adrenaline-fueled terror and determination. She was no longer just fighting for the money or the land, but for her very survival and the future of her adopted family. The viewer's heart is in their throat, watching as she used her cunning and strength to overpower the bounty hunter, using the very skills he had underestimated. He was a brute, but she was a survivor. She was fighting for her freedom, for her identity, for the love of her new family. The bounty hunter, defeated, made one last, desperate lunge. He grabbed Sarah Bell's money satchel, a final attempt to take back what he believed was rightfully his. But a rope from a makeshift trap springs loose. The chapter ends as he is pulled over the cliff, screaming, and Sarah Bell watches the money fall with him, a symbol of the system she has now truly left behind. The audience is left to wonder if the money and the life it represented is gone for good. The siege was over. The bounty hunter was dead, his demise a brutal lesson in the finality of his world's greed. Sarah Bell and the tribe returned to the village, exhausted but victorious. The air, once thick with smoke and the stench of violence, was now filled with the sweet scent of new grass and a profound sense of relief. The villagers looked at Sarah Bell with new respect, seeing her not as an outsider, but as a true member of their Tio Spay. She had proven her worth, not with wealth, but with courage, and her place in the community was now cemented. The emotional arc was one of peace and profound satisfaction. She had not only overcome her physical trials, but had found an inner peace that money or property could never provide. The viewer feels the triumph of her journey and the satisfying resolution of the main conflict. She was a woman who had lost everything, only to find something more valuable. She had found a home, a true home, for the first time in her life. The young warrior she had helped now stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder in a gesture of kinship. The chapter ends with the arrival of a new, unexpected figure, a man on a horse, with the unmistakable bearing of the law. The audience is left wondering, is this Silas returning to finish the job, or is it something else entirely? The man on the horse was not Silas, but the sheriff from a nearby town. He was an honest lawman, a rare archetype in the Old West. He had heard rumors of the conflict and had come to investigate. He told Sarah Bell that the bounty hunter's death would lead to an official investigation. He also revealed a stunning twist. Her son, Silas, had lost his own money in a bad real estate deal and had been disinherited by his wife's family. He had heard about his mother's new community and was now coming to find her, hoping she would solve his financial troubles. The emotional arc was one of cold detachment and strength. She was no longer a victim. She saw Silas's misfortune not with joy, but with pity. Her past no longer had a hold on her. She had chosen to leave her old life behind, and she would not be pulled back in by a son who had only ever seen her as a possession, not a person. She refused his offer, finally putting her past behind her and asserting her new identity. The viewer feels the full weight of her moral growth. She had not just found a new home, she had found herself. The sheriff, seeing her unwavering resolve, made an unexpected offer. He told her that her son's family was still coming to the area. He had secured a land grant for a new town in the valley, and he needed a promoter of culture to help establish it. He ended the conversation by asking if she'd consider taking on the role, a strange offer that seemed to pull her back to her old life. The audience is left with a final question. Would she accept a role that would force her to confront her past again? Sarah Bell consulted with the elder, who listened patiently to her story. He reminded her of the importance of community and the preservation of the sacred land. He told her that her life was no longer about fleeing the past, but about building a better future, a future where her new family and her old world could coexist. She realized that she could use her knowledge, her wisdom, and her strength to be a bridge between the two cultures. She decided to accept the sheriff's offer, but on her own terms. The emotional arc was one of renewed purpose and a sense of destiny. She was no longer a reactionary force, but a proactive one, using her past and present to shape the future. The viewer feels her strength and her commitment to a new way of life. She would use the rest of her money to found a new town, but one that respected and coexisted with the native people. She would build a town with no walls, a town based on mutual respect and shared resources. She would be a pioneer in the true sense, a woman who led the way in settling the West, not with force, but with peace. The chapter ends with Sarah Bell telling the elder her decision. He smiles, a rare and knowing expression, and tells her, "You have found your own way." He then hands her a small carved object and tells her to never lose it, for it will guide her. The audience is left to wonder what the object is and what wisdom it holds. Sarah Bell used a portion of her remaining money to buy the land grant from the sheriff. She began to lay the foundation for the new settlement, working alongside the tribe. The town was built in a way that incorporated both cultures: a trading post that respected native customs, a garden that grew traditional crops, and a home for her. She named the town not after herself, but with a word given to her by the elder, a word that meant coexistence. The town became a living, breathing testament to her courage and resilience. The emotional arc was one of pure satisfaction and industriousness. She was a pioneer in the true sense, forging a path and building something new. The viewer feels proud of her accomplishments and the tangible manifestation of her emotional journey. The town, with its peaceful harmony and its blend of cultures, was the physical representation of the spiritual peace she had found on her journey. She was no longer a victim, but a leader, a woman who had turned her pain into a purpose. She was visited by the sheriff, who brought news. Her son, Silas, had arrived in a nearby town with his wife. He had heard about the new settlement, and believing his mother had used his inheritance to found it, he had come to claim it. The sheriff says, "They're coming to stake their claim." The chapter ends with the inevitable showdown looming. The bounty hunter had been a distraction. Her family was the real enemy, the one she would have to face one last time. Silas and Eliza arrived at the new settlement, a group of tired, desperate travelers. They were no longer the arrogant, triumphant figures who had cast her out. Their faces were a mixture of confusion and contempt as they saw the peaceful coexistence of the cultures, the town built on a foundation they could never understand. They confronted Sarah Bell, accusing her of stealing their inheritance and demanding the money she had used to build the town. The emotional arc was one of ultimate strength and peace. She was no longer afraid of them. She saw them for what they were, products of a system that had failed them, just as it had failed her. She calmly told them the truth, that the money was gone, and that she used it to build a life worth living, a life they could never understand. She offered them help, a final act of charity, and a display of her immense growth. But they saw her generosity as a sign of her weakness. Silas, in a fit of rage, lunged at her, searching her person for the money. He found the small carved object the elder gave her. He opens it, and inside is not money, but a single beautifully carved buffalo tooth, a symbol of the sacred life she now protects. He throws it to the ground in disgust, and the chapter ends with the sight of her bending to pick it up. The truth of her loss and her gains starkly revealed. The money was gone, but the spirit, the sacredness of the land and her new family, was her true wealth. The final chapter provides a peaceful resolution. Silas and Eliza, having lost their final gambit, are left with a choice: to stay and learn the new way of life to become a part of the town of coexistence, or to leave and face the harsh world alone. The story ends with Sarah Bell, no longer a widow or a fugitive, but a leader and a bridge between two cultures. She walks through the town she built, a testament to her courage and resilience. She had been a victim of a system that told her she had no power, and she had transformed into a woman who had created a world of her own. The viewer is left with a sense of deep satisfaction and hope for her future. She walks to the edge of the town and stands on the sacred mountain, looking out at the valley. The town of coexistence, her home, is thriving below her. A single buffalo grazes in the distance, a symbol of the life and land she has helped protect. The spirit of the Old West, once a source of terror and greed, had been transformed by her courage and her vision. Her story is a testament to the idea that a person's worth is not measured by the money they have, but by the community they build. As the camera pans out, we see Sarah Bell's new community thriving. Her final words, "The house I left was just a cage. The home I found has no walls," are left to echo in the viewer's mind. A final thought on the meaning of true freedom. She had not only survived, she had created a new world,